Bryn Brovero. I'm the Director of Debate at the University of Mary Washington. If we could turn off our cell phones and video and things like that, that would be appreciated. This morning we're going to talk about deciding the debate in the 1AR. Okay, this is the 1AR lecture notes that you should be referencing. So how many of you are 1As? Well, looks like there might be more 1As than 2As in the room. Easiest speech in the debate? Yeah? I would imagine most of you would beg to differ, but maybe aren't comfortable speaking up about that. How many of you are sometimes intimidated or daunted by what you have to cover in the 1AR? Okay. How many of you sometimes get a rush at the end of a 1AR that you feel was well done? Okay. How many of you are 2As who have been told, I thought the 2AR was really good, but I couldn't find that argument in the 1AR? Every 2A should have their hand up. You've all heard that at some point. The goal of this lecture, obviously some of you may not do the 1AR, but the goal of this lecture is to help improve the 1ARs overall and help 2As know better what they can do to assist with improving the quality of the 1AR. And so the intent of this is to make sure that both team members are functioning to optimize the odds of winning the debate. So, in order to start, we're going to talk about A, strategic goals. First, you should formulate a strategy. Okay, I know Eric talked a lot about predicting what the AF would do. On the flip side, obviously, when you're AF, you need to try to predict what the neg will do, starting early in the debate. Okay, you want to try to predict what the neg block is going to do. As a 1AR, you are going to have to respond to all of that. Okay, and it's real hard. The time differential makes it structurally harder for the 1AR to cover. And so, trying to make predictions about what the neg block will do, trying to assess where the neg is weak or strong, realistically assessing what turns you can win. These are all factors that go into formulating a strategy before your 1AR. You also want to make similar predictions about what you think the 2NR will do. Okay? For example, you might want to figure out if it makes sense to straight turn an off-case argument, that is just go for turns to force the 2NR to cover it. That might make sense in circumstances where the neg is particularly weak on a disad and probably doesn't want to have to go for that disad. You could force the neg's hand. Okay, this would mean planning on how to execute that offense-only strategy on the disad. Okay, and to do that, you need to make predictions about what you think the neg will say in order to best facilitate you going for that type of strategy. Second, you want to foreshadow radical changes in your own strategy. Okay, if you were considering a radical change in the strategy in the 2AR, based on possibly conceding certain advantages or conceding links to arguments, you want to make sure you lay the groundwork for that in the 1AR. Okay? For instance, you might want to say that if their terrorism link is true, it proves your solvency, okay, to get out of a circumvention argument. You may not want to actually concede the terrorism link at that stage in the 1AR, but you could concede that that would lay the groundwork for you to potentially concede the terrorism link in the 2AR to win your solvency debate. And then you would still have to answer other parts of terrorism. For instance, you could go all in on risk of terrorism low, no nuclear acquisition, things like that. But foreshadowing that earlier makes it less likely for the 2AR to be told that that strategy seemed totally new in the 2AR. Okay? You want to lay groundwork for some of those assessments. Or, if you want the 2AR to be able to straight turn a disad, you need to make sure you sufficiently and prominently cover the aspects or the components of the offense. For instance, on a disad, that is usually the uniqueness and the link turn. You want to make sure you have sufficiently and prominently covered those in the 1AR so that the 2AR can do that. Third, you want to lay groundwork for 2AR assessments. You want to highlight critical arguments that the 2AR will depend on, like we just mentioned, uniqueness for turns. You want to do some impact assessment. Okay, you should begin assessing the certain systemic impact of the case versus the very probabilistic risk of the disad. Okay, you want to weigh your offense. That means actually remembering to extend your impacts and compare them to the other teams. And generally speaking, if you think about, the 1AR has a lot of pressure, right? We already mentioned massive time constraints relative to what the neg block does. But if you start to make these things that I just described a habit, They will be a template for how you think about what the 1AR needs to do. Okay, if you remind yourself that you need to think about strategy, that you need to forecast what you're going to do strategically in the 2AR, and lay the groundwork for those assessments, it will make it much easier for you to filter what the neg is doing into the debate, in the debate. Letter B, prepping for the 1AR. Okay, so probably one of the hardest things going into a 1AR is figuring out how to manage the prep time, because again, you've got a lot of arguments to cover and less time to do it. Your in-round prep for the 1AR starts after the 2AC is backflowed. Does everybody know what backflowed means? After you've gone and filled in the 2AC's flow for them, after the 2AC is over, that's called backflowing. Once that task is accomplished, you can start prepping for your 1AR. Now that may seem strange, because the neg block has not happened yet. How could you possibly prep for it? Well, I will now tell you. First, you can do pre-neg block prep. A, you can do damage control. Okay? You should consult with your partner about arguments that the 2A dropped or poorly covered in the 2AC. Okay? There's always things, 2As can be self-critical. You could also be critical of the 2A. There's almost always something that could have been a little bit better covered. Okay? You should get cards the 2A wanted to read and didn't get to. Okay? Those are some things that you can start figuring out how to sneak those arguments in. Okay, or what you have already on the flow that justifies some of the arguments that your partner wanted to make. B, you can ask about arguments you didn't understand, like new arguments or tricks or something your partner may have been unclear on. Okay, you've got to understand the 2AC in order to be able to extend and defend those arguments in the 1AR. And if you are not familiar with the 2AC's blocks, or if the 2AC was confusing or unclear during the 2AC, that is going to situate you poorly for executing in the 1AR. Okay, I used to make it a habit of, when my partner wrote 2AC blocks, I made a habit of reading those blocks before the tournament, like in the van on the way or on the bus on the way, so that I was familiar with those arguments going into the debate. Okay, it should rarely be the case that the 2AC is the first time you've heard something. Okay, obviously there will be some situations, somebody read a new DA or things like that, or a new case argument that you folks hadn't heard before, so you haven't used those answers before, but that's not a reason that you can't try to familiarize yourself with them. Okay, you should familiarize yourself with them. For a period of time, my senior year, I did the insides on the affirmative. I did the 2AC and the 1AR. That made my 1AR so easy, because I had written the 2AC blocks. I knew what every 2AC card said. Now, I'm not advocating anyone turn around and do the insides. Do not go running back to your lab leaders and say, Adrian said we should all do the insides. I did not say that. In fact, I said the opposite. You should not all do that. But that, just to demonstrate how helpful it is in terms of understanding the 2AC arguments, the fact that I was the 2A meant that I had a very intimate knowledge of the arguments going into the 1AR. 1ARs can do the same thing, even without being the 2A, by simply reading the 2AC blocks and talking to their partner about them. Okay? And during the debate, you need to make those clarifications if there are things that you are still unsure of. Letter C, actually start prepping. Okay? At the very least, you can start circling arguments or writing signposts for arguments that you are very likely to extend. Okay? Now you may say, how would I possibly know what I'm going to extend? Well, when they read a one-off K, you would probably end up extending a lot of the arguments on the K flow. So it would be pretty hard for you to not be able to figure out an argument you could extend. Okay? Or if they've read a counterplan, what do you think the odds are that you are not going to extend the permutation in the 1AR? Probably pretty low. Okay? So there are some flows, or for instance, if you know this team likes to go for politics and you have a pretty unpopular or controversial app, the odds are that you are going to need to extend your link turn. Okay? Or if your partner only put impact turns on a disapp, then you know you're going to have to extend those impact turns. Okay? But assessing what you are likely to extend, okay, a lot of times isn't as complicated as you think. Oftentimes when you look at the flow, it'll be pretty obvious. Should you be extending the crappy analytic argument you made, or the really sweet card from yesterday that says the dissent's unique? Probably start with the uniqueness card. I'm not saying you can't also extend the crappy analytic, but you probably want to extend the uniqueness card for sure. So you can start by circling some of those arguments. That's something, having a highlighter or something like that, or a different colored pen to kind of draw attention to those things. You can also start writing signposts for those things, and by signposts, I mean things like Off 2AC number 3, non-unique. Obama doesn't have political capital now. That is a signpost. Off 2AC number 3, tells you where it is, tells you it's the 2AC column, number 3, non-unique, is a part of the tag of the original argument. It also tells the judge what the impact is if you win the argument. It means that the dissent is non-unique. And then some reference to the crux of the argument, that political capital is low or political capital will be spent or something like that. You can also start writing out arguments about your evidence or in support of your argument. Okay? You can usually start writing a summary of what the argument is. Okay? Usually the first thing I did was I had the signpost, okay, off 2AC number 3, blah, blah, blah. But then I would usually have an explanation of why the argument was good, okay, or what the argument was. Okay? So if you jump ahead in your outline for a second, this is why I would have liked the projector to work, but it still doesn't work. Can you scroll ahead in your outline for a moment to the off case flow? Everybody find that? I think it's a header. If not, it's the first enormous boxy thing that you will find in your outline. Everybody find that? Okay, so at the top, the columns, I want you to look at the 1AR column, the one that says prep answers as 2NC speaks. Everybody with me still? Okay, you will notice that the first thing I have prepped there is off 2AC number 1 and 2 non-unique group. Okay, that's the signpost. And then the first argument that I have written there is our evidence proves massive momentum against Iran, healthcare, gay marriage, Syrian oppression, moderate conservative fears about inspections, and terrorist funding mean it faces massive opposition in the Senate. Okay, I have written out an explanation of the argument. I do not need to know what the neg says on this uniqueness argument in order to write that stuff out. Why? Because that's just my argument, right? If we have picked good cards, if we have thought about what we're going to say, we should be able to describe our own argument, okay? You can even look back at the card if you have to, okay? And then the second thing I have there that you'll notice, number 2, our evidence is better. And then I have reasons, okay? Some of those reasons I could write before the negative even spoke, okay? One reason it's better is it's predictive. And maybe their evidence will turn out to be predictive too. But I'm going to make the judgment call that we have read a predictive piece of evidence. I should emphasize that it's predictive. Okay? And then another reason that it's useful is that it proves both the link and impact are not unique, because fights about Iran might be enough to trigger the impact, and fights about Iran are already happening, making the link not unique too, or the internal link not unique. Okay, these are things I can anticipate might be relevant. Okay, the worst that happens is they kick the disad and you don't end up doing this stuff. Or you make a decision that you want to extend different arguments. All you have to do then is just draw a line through those so that you don't make those arguments in the 1AR. But you can gain some time in being able to prep them earlier. All right, jump back to where we originally were in the outline, back up like on page 2 or something like that. We are still on starting to prep. So the format that I used was, I usually made my first argument a reassertion of our argument, followed by reasons why it was better, okay? And reasons why it was better can often be relatively easy, like the author is qualified, the date is recent. If you have a card from today, you're probably in pretty good shape. Okay, even if they have contrary cards from today, the fact that someone has made your argument today can be pretty powerful. You can also say the methodology behind your argument is good. You have a card that quotes both Democrats and Republicans. You have a card that takes into account something that happened yesterday, so that's why it's better methodologically than their older evidence. Okay, you can make assessments about your card. However, you should leave yourself room. Okay, you should not fill up the entirety of your 1AR column. You need to leave yourself room for when they do actually make arguments, in case you need to say different things or add more stuff. Is everybody still with me on this, or do y'all just think I'm crazy? Maybe both, but everyone's still with me? Okay, all right. Number 2, during the negative block. Your goal should be to have all the 2NC's arguments prepped, the 2NC's arguments prepped, by the time the 1NR stands up, okay? Which means you want to spend some of that time prior to the 2NC. Some 2Ns take a decent amount of prep time, and if you can guess what they're going for, okay, there are some signs, like the 1NR asked a bunch of questions about the case arguments, so the 1NRs might be more likely to do case stuff. leaving you everything else to think is possible 2NC material. Or the 2N jumped in during cross-ex to ask some questions that they needed clarified for their own speech. So like when they suddenly chimed in to ask some questions about the critique answers, that might be a sign that they're going for the K. So there are some signs, okay, or you may know a particular team, the 2N always covers this argument. So you can start by prioritizing things you think the 2N is likely to go for. Then obviously when the 2NC announces their roadmap, okay, then you have a better signal, right? They have now told you what pages they're covering. And so even as they still dork around setting up their stand and things like that, you could still be working to get your thoughts organized about those arguments. And then during the 2NC, as they are going, you can also work on prepping answers to their arguments. Okay, I understand that this is a complicated process, and let me also be clear, I am not saying you should not flow the 2NC. Okay, what I'm going to suggest is that you should selectively flow the 2NC. Selectively. Okay, that is very different from, Adrian said don't flow the 2NC. Okay. Didn't say that. I said selectively flow the 2NC. So while the 2NC is speaking, there may be times where you don't need to write down everything they are saying. Okay, when the 2NC decides to read card after card on economic decline causes war, do you need all 6 of those cards written down? Or do you just need to keep marking that they're still, a little mark that they're ditto, they're still reading the same argument? Okay, during that time, that is a time that you can be working on your answers to their arguments, either on that part of the flow or up above that. Okay? So you should be trying as you hear. All of you are capable. You all say, oh, I can't do this. All of you are actually capable, occasionally, of writing down an answer to something someone says while the speech is happening. Okay? You'll hear something and you'll say, oh, that card didn't assume that. Or that card relied on this. Or I heard them say Zizek. I have Zizek indites. Like, you are capable of thinking and writing down some of the responses as you hear it. The odds are, though, it is hard to keep up consistently, right? And so you need to find those little breaks, like when the 2NC is reading a pile of cards that are about the same thing. Okay? What I did during those periods of time was I would make sure that my partner, I would kind of nudge my partner and make sure my partner was paying the utmost attention. Okay, the 2A should be flowing every single detail of the neg block, okay? But I would make sure my partner was paying the utmost attention such that if there was something in there, because I got kind of sucked into writing down my arguments or something like that, if there was something in there I needed to know, my partner would let me know, okay? Or if there was something that I felt I had missed, I could ask my partner, hey, I feel like maybe I missed, in the midst of those econ cards, was there also some like turns the case argument that I missed? Having your partner flow carefully during that allows you to catch up, okay? And so what I would do is if I thought I heard something that kind of sounded out of whack from they were reading a pile of econ cards, again, I had a highlighter handy that I would put a dot on my flow right there to remind myself I needed to ask the 2A, what the hell just happened there? Okay, that's something that I could do during prep time. But I would the reason why the highlighter helps is that it jumps out on your flow. As you're getting, before you stand up for the 1AR, you need to skim through and say, did I cover everything I needed to cover? Okay. Or another thing, there may be times where they read a theory block, and you already have a 1AR theory block written to it. Do you need to start writing all of the answers down on your flow if you already have a block? No. So you can make a mark with the highlighter to remind yourself that's a spot where you need to make sure you've pulled the block before you give the 1AR. Yes?
I guess, are there ways other than just doing like the pre-round, or pre-neg block, like baseline extensions of your argument to avoid falling into like the negative trap of when they just kind of group large sections of the floor, particularly in like critique debate and stuff?
Well, to be honest, I would love to be a 1A in a critique debate these days because so many of the neg's arguments don't vary dramatically. I think it's a lot harder or more complicated for a 1AR to give a 1AR on a 9 minutes of politics where the cards are coming fast and furious and they're super short and hard to flow sometimes and often blippy. And the politics debate tends to be, I'm not saying that critique debates are not complex, okay? I'm not saying that. But oftentimes flowing politics debates can be a little bit more complex in some regards because K cards tend to be longer. Okay, so there's more time, gaps in time where they've read their tag and you have a little bit of time to catch up. Second, K debates don't change dramatically, uniqueness-wise, right? K is not unique every day. It's not really all that different from round to round. So you can actually write 1AR blocks, which is something I will plan on addressing in a few moments, but you should write 1AR blocks that can help you. Like, you have a permutation argument against the cap K. Why not write a block that makes all the arguments you want for why that permutation is a legitimate permutation, why that permutation avoids the link, why that permutation demonstrates a double bind. All those things are standard arguments. Again, I'm not saying that you should tune out and not listen for complexities, but given that those debates change less and the evidence changes less, I think it might be easier to write 1AR blocks that anticipate that. By contrast, a politics debate could change based on something that happened in Congress during round 2, going into round 3. Okay, does Zizek go up or down during round 2 that affects you round 3? No, Zizek's still high now.
Okay, so what happens in the event that the 2A is like multitasking and putting down cards for them?
I'm sorry, the 2A is doing what?
Like, what happens if like the 1A, I mean not the 1A, the 2A is like not flowing like they're supposed to?
Well, you gotta scold that 2A first and foremost. Let me make this clear, 2As need to be flowing. Okay, now you may be saying, but I need the 2A to pull these cards for me because I don't know where they are. Well, that's bad on you. Okay? You should familiarize yourself. You should have a 1AR file for yourself on your computer. Okay? You should have a copy of the big AF file that your partner works out of. Okay? Or, if it's the case that you're still using paper, you can have a 1AR accordion. I debated in a paper era. I had a 1AR accordion. Okay? I knew exactly what arguments. I had theory blocks that were written in 1AR versions. I had other arguments that were written in 1AR versions. And so, optimally, you don't want the 2A having being distracted and pulling cards. So I would suggest if there's a circumstance where you need the 2A to pull a card because you have no idea where it is and it's an argument you haven't heard before, that's the time you personally should go back to flowing carefully so the 2A can do that. But you want to try to minimize those situations in the first place. Okay? Because the other thing is the 2A does still need to have a real good flow because they're the one that has to close the debate. Okay? And if they've missed stuff during the block, it's more problematic. Okay, so we will talk a little bit more on how to execute during the neg block in a few moments, but number 3, post the neg block, after the 1NR is over. A, you should take prep if you need it for any of the following, and odds are you will. Okay, I'm not saying never take prep, we'll talk about that in a second. A, you should take prep to decide your time allocation. Okay, you should ask yourself, do I need to spend that much time on the T argument? Yes, maybe they spent a lot of time on it in the 2NC, but you actually need it. Do you need to spend as much time? Or, how should you be prioritizing the counterplan and its net benefit? Okay, or how much time do you need to spend on the case, since most of their arguments don't really assume your AF? Okay, these are some things you can factor in. You should also take prep to look at key neg cards. Okay, you want to, if there's new links read, you might want to take a look at those. If they've snuck in a value to life card that you haven't heard before, check it out. Okay, if there's a new, some answers to an add-on that you really want to extend, you should probably take a look at those. You should also take prep to fill in gaps in your flow where you didn't have enough time to finish writing stuff out during the neg speeches. Okay. There's also that time between the 2NC and the 1NR. There's cross-X and sometimes even a tiny bit of prep snuck in there. That's some more time that you can use to fill in your flow. Optimally, though, you've done a lot of the work that you don't have to take a ton of prep for the 1AR. How many of you struggle fairly regularly with taking 4 or more minutes of prep for the 1AR? Yeah. It's hard. It's hard. Again, you have to answer a lot of stuff, and it gets worse when there's a pile of new stuff in the block. But that's why spending more time familiarizing yourself with 2AC arguments and thinking about what arguments you would likely extend in the 1AR if said debate were to happen will then help you get faster at prepping for stuff. Okay, again, like I said, there is a chance that they don't go for everything that you've started prepping before the block happens. There is that chance. But I didn't find it happen that often. Okay? The worst that happened, and this is something else you should take prep for if necessary, the worst that happened was I had to draw a line through some arguments I had written on my flow just to remind myself not to say them during the 1AR. So that's the last thing you might want prep for, is to just kind of double check your flow, double check that you filled it in, double check for the highlighting marks for where you needed to ask your partner something or you needed to remember to answer conditionality, or you need it, or there was a voting issue that was initiated during the neg block. Those are all little things that a highlighter will help you with. Another thing that I often use the highlighter for while we're on the subject of highlighters, because I love them. If there were arguments that were dropped from the 2AC, like a lot of times the 2N, and this seems to happen quite frequently in K debates where people have these link walls and stuff like that way up at the top, and then they suddenly just like neglect to answer any of your arguments down at the bottom specifically. Circle those with a highlighter to draw your attention to those. Okay, sometimes what I did in the 1AR was I would start at the bottom, and let me make this clear, I would start at the bottom and then go back up to the top. I would not start at the bottom and work my way backwards up. Okay, none of us flow that way. There is nobody who can flow backwards up the top. Okay, it is you can jump down to the bottom to extend the number 10 alternative fails card that you think the 2NC didn't answer, and explain why that card is good and why the 2NC didn't answer it. But then I would strongly recommend going back up to the top to the first argument you plan to extend from the 2AC and work your way down. Yes, sir?
So is it more preferable to have like the affirmative like outline and like outline instead of like having it like just like in like regular debate lingo like impact terms and stuff like that? Like
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
like for instance like extend the alternative and then like you know like you have the subpoint B on there like what you were talking about. Like you have you have like the debate and like the ordered form is like 1 subpoint A, 2 subpoint A, 3 subpoint A. Is that like more preferable to have in the debate instead of just like having like tagline and then
Okay. I think I understand where his question is going now. Let me reinforce this now. For the 1AR purposes, on off-case arguments, like the one that we were looking at a few moments ago, you want to follow the 2AC's number structure. Okay, for off-case arguments, this is super important. You want to follow the 2AC's number structure. You would want, optimally, 2As, to have numbered things straight down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. Everybody understand that concept? Minimizing the A's, the B's, the C's, and the D's. Okay, we do not, all of us can very quickly follow numbers. I'm not saying that we don't know our alphabet. We do know our alphabet. However, when someone says it's the 5th argument, do you automatically go, oh, of course that's letter E? No. Instead, you move about 5 arguments, like you count in numbers. You do not count in letters. Okay? Numbers are preferable. I'm not saying that you can't occasionally have an A and a B to demonstrate something, but it should be numbered straight down. Second along those lines, let me emphasize this, you as the 2A should not chunk the debate. Okay? We should not be saying off the uniqueness, off the link, off the such and such. Because, again, we have a tendency to number that if you say off the uniqueness, I will start writing 1, 2, 3, 4, and then when you say off the link, most of you will turn around and say, my first argument is. So now I have a second number 1 on my flow. And then when you say off the impact, you're like 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I now have 3 number 1s on my flow. I am the 1AR, and when I go to the 1AR, I go to that flow in the 1AR, and I say off the 2AC number 1, which one am I talking about? Okay, optimally, you just want there to be 1 number 1, and 1 number 2, and 1 number 3, okay? Because once you have multiple sets of numbers going on the flow, and even if the 2A didn't number, even if they just said off the uniqueness debate, off the link debate, etc., oftentimes judges may still write down numbers or conceptually think about it number-wise, okay? Optimally, the 2A on the off-case flows should number straight down, okay? And it's not that hard, okay? You literally all know how to count. Okay? And most of you don't make more than 10 answers to anything, so we're talking about 1 to 10 here, folks. Not too hard. Makes it a lot easier for the 1AR structure. Now, I said on the off-case pages of the flow, that's how the 1AR should reference things. What about the on-case pages of the flow? Whose numbers should we be referencing? The 1NC. Okay, the 1NC is the first time that arguments have been listed straight down in a row, okay, as opposed to your pretty sounding 1AC that had all sorts of transitions and flowery rhetoric and long tags and stuff like that. By contrast, usually the 1NC is like, no internal link, blah, 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 no solvency, circumvention, your impact card sucks, blah, blah, those things, right? You number those straight down on the case. Okay, that way in the 1AR you refer to the 1NC's number structure on the case, whether they've actually numbered or not. Okay? Even if they didn't number, you should still refer to things in numerical areas. Okay? If you say you are talking about, if you're saying off the 1NC number 4, no solvency circumvention, am I going to be looking for 4 at the top of my flow or halfway down or so? Right? You all understand that telling me a number, even if I had it as number 3 and you had it as number 4, if you tell me a number, it's going to put me in geographically the right area on my flow. Okay? I'm not going to look for 7 at the top of my flow. I'm going to be looking for 7 down here. Okay? So even if your number is off by 1, the numbering helps the judge figure out where you are geographically on the flow. Okay? And you all think that we have the same words written down, but that's usually not the case. So a combination of geographic reference, 2AC number 3, and an argument, non-unique, then narrows it down. Even if I had it as number 2, I'm like, oh, but I'm in the right area, there's a non-uniqueness argument, she must be talking about that. Okay? So the combination of number and argument is crucial, and this is super important for the 1AR. Okay? Super important for the 1AR, because as we began this lecture, remember, we said a lot of 1ARs are accused of missing things or dropping things. Okay, it is hard to cover in the 1AR. Nobody thinks 1ARs can cover everything. So if push comes to shove, people have a tendency to think the worst about 1AR. Oh, the 1AR is so hard, you just couldn't cover. Hey, I was a 1AR, and I still find myself being very scrutinizing and probably too hard on 1ARs. Why? Because we've just kind of all decided 1ARs cannot cover. Structurally impossible. Okay? What I'm about to talk about a little bit more is kind of how to fool everyone into thinking that it's not structurally impossible and that you've done it. Okay? Looking forward to that. Okay, let me finish talking about prep time / what you're doing after the negative block. Letter B, stand-up 1ARs. How many of you have ever done a stand-up 1AR? For shame. Okay, I thought, do all of you think those are cool? Like when you get to stand up and it psychologically devastates the neg block? That's certainly what I thought when I was your age. Okay, totally thought, I was like, I am a badass because I gave a stand-up 1AR. Okay, I'm sure all of you who've done it have at least thought that once or twice. Like, I'm so ready, I gotta go. Okay, however, how many of you can honestly say that your 1AR wouldn't have improved if you had maybe taken 30 seconds of prep, 60 seconds of prep? And you're willing to stand by, no amount of prep would have helped you? Oh wait, sorry. Okay. Okay. So one of the first times I gave a 1AR in front of my college coach, Ross Smith from Wake Forest, I thought I was being a real hot shot. I didn't take very much prep time. I'd given a whole bunch of stand-up 1ARs in high school. Like I said, thought I was a badass. I stood up, gave a stand-up 1AR, sat down, and before, I'm not even sure I had like fully gotten into the chair yet when Ross just ripped into me. Okay, he rattled off a list, and he was pretty efficient, super long list of things that would have been better about my 1AR if I had just taken a minute of prep. And like a lot of them could have been better with only a minute of prep. Like I missed an argument here, I hadn't written out an explanation there, okay? A lot of things, generally speaking, even just 30 to 60 seconds. Okay, so I would err against ever giving stand-up 1ARs unless your 2A has already put you in a devastating prep time hole. Okay, if the 2AC took 7 of the 8 minutes you get where you're from, or 4.5 of the 5 minutes you get where you're from, or 9 of the 10 minutes at the Fancy Pants National Tournament, then maybe stand-up 1ARs might be more justified. But generally speaking, it's your prep too. Okay, you are part of the AF team. You are entitled to some of that prep. Okay, so you should try to make sure that you take advantage of using it. It is generally the case that in most circumstances, a few more seconds will help you catch things you might have missed otherwise, or will help you in writing things down. Okay, a lot of you are like, I don't get very much down for the 1AR in the first place. Then why would we be giving stand-up 1ARs, decreasing the odds that we get stuck down? Backing up 1 second, one other thing I kind of forgot to mention. In terms of getting stuff prepped on your flow prior to the 1AR, one of the things, so there's all sorts of skills that we have in debate that transfer into areas that you don't necessarily think about. Flowing skills and coming up with abbreviations, super important to executing in the 1AR. Okay, I literally used to script out whole sentences of my 1AR, but using very few symbols to convey those ideas. Okay, so I could get a lot written down on my flow. Yes, I had to translate it as I was speaking, but that was because I spent a lot of time practicing flowing. And I had, one of my other coaches was like, well, why don't you give more 1ARs if you want to improve your 1ARs? And I was like, actually, I need to practice flowing so that I become more fluent in symbols, so that I can write more things down for my 1AR in a shorter amount of time. Does that make sense to everybody? If you can convey an entire sentence in a single symbol, that will save you an immense amount of time. Okay, so I even had, my senior year, after a couple of AF tournaments, I had symbols for like whole paragraph explanations that I had practiced and learned how to recite in like 10 seconds. Okay, so I would be able to convey a series of arguments based on, I had a X with a circle with a line under it. Okay, that X with a circle with a line under it meant that I had 15 seconds of prepared material that I knew how to say. Okay, as opposed to having to write all of that out longhand in full sentences. Yeah.
Put it in X with a circle with a line under it.
To be honest, I'm ashamed that I do not remember at this point. It was, my 1ARs were a very long time ago. Last one I gave was 20 years ago, so, yes sir.
So would it be key to like not follow like a particular set of like debate writing that like your coaches have like interpreted for you, but to like make your own?
I would say, you know, when you start off, usually older debaters or your coaches give you lots of abbreviation ideas and things like that, but ultimately, you have to develop your own that you're comfortable with, okay? Like, I used a bunch, you know, I'm sure some of you have had circumstances where you and your partner don't necessarily agree on abbreviations, okay? That can be frustrating. But I had like an elaborate set of them, and if I was gonna have to wait for my partner to learn them or my coach to hand them down to me, I wouldn't have made as much progress on that. So yes, and the summer, by the way, is a great time for you to be trying out those abbreviations. Okay, we have more practice rounds coming up. We have demo debates coming up. You should work to try to incorporate some new abbreviations, particularly topic-specific ones. All right, letter C, the flow and structure of the 1AR. This is where we're going to get into a little bit more detail here about how this all gets executed. First, do not flow the entire negative block. You should flow selectively. Again, I repeat, do not go to your lab leaders and say, Adrian said, don't flow the neg block. That is not what I said. The takeaway from this should not be that. Okay? It is a question of being more selective. You only need to flow enough of the block to serve as references or signposts. Sometimes, again, it helped me to have a different color pen or a highlighter handy to mark where cards were read or where I needed a clarification from my partner about an argument, or to mark things I couldn't drop, like a voting issue that was initiated for the first time in the neg block. Okay. Number 2, group similar arguments. You only get 5 minutes to answer 13 minutes of negative arguments. Okay, if you try to go line by line, you will fail. You will fail miserably. Okay, you cannot go line by line through everything they said. You will end up dropping the last 2 disads in your order in the 1AR. Okay, you need to group things that are similar. Now, you may be thinking, I've heard you told your lab don't do the link debate and things like that. That is true. I have said that. I'm saying more that you should be selective about what arguments you choose to extend in the first place. You do not need to extend every 2AC argument on the politics GA. And it may be the case that in some instances, you could group the uniqueness and link term debate because they kind of have to go together for you to win them anyway. Okay? But if the uniqueness debate is here and the link debate is here, like uniqueness was number 2 and your link term is number 8, no, you should not be grouping them. Okay, you should answer things on number 2 and then answer things on number 8. If they happen to be 2 and 3 though, you could group them and say off 2AC number 2 and 3, the uniqueness and the link term group. Okay, and then you can cover those arguments together. Number 3, grouping techniques. A, don't group everything. Okay, you should answer specific important arguments on the line by line. Okay, if you are grouping a big pile of the 2NC's permutation arguments, and somewhere in the midst of there, they have an intrinsicness argument about that your permutation is intrinsic and that's a voting issue, you should single that out and answer that specifically, lest you be accused of having dropped it. Okay. B, don't group too much. Okay, it might be okay to group the cheap shot T violation that they extended for 20 seconds in at the end of the 1NR, but you should probably not group the entire security K that they spent the entire block on. Okay, can't group that. 20-second T violation, yes. 13 minutes of a K flow, no. Letter C, embed clash. Who knows what embedding clash is?
Instead of saying, like, they say this, but this, you make it into a coherent sentence, like you know how to use the English language, and be more word efficient, having better word economies.
Okay, so the concept of embedding clash, Kate's description was on the right track, is to incorporate references to the line by line within your arguments, but without having to say, they say, they say, they say, or off the 2NC's number 4, or blah, blah, blah. Okay, like he said, using the actual normal language patterns. Okay, the way you do this, if you take a look again at your flow, okay, go to the off-case flow for a moment. We're looking at that same 1AR column. Well, actually, for a second, let's look at the 2NC and the flow of the 2NC column. Everybody still with me? Off-case flow. 2NC says flow of 2NC. Okay. The 2NC said impact-specific uniqueness post-dates, even if political capital low, can win or run. Okay. You will then notice my flow of the 2NC is what I would actually write down, as opposed to the 2NC says, I don't have to write all that down. Okay. Instead, I just write Iran uniqueness PD for post-dates. Does everybody see that? Shorter version without having to write out every word they said. Okay, then they read a will pass now card from June 21st. You will notice the 2AC card was from June 22nd. So I'm not too worried about getting down that it was a June 21st card. I just mark an X that a card was read there. Okay, I can basically, if I just write an X, that means I know my card is more recent. Then they say momentum favors passage, only the plan derails, and they extend their 1NC link evidence. I wrote down Mo for momentum and link. Okay? Then, look at the 1AR column. Okay, remember, I'm grouping the 2AC 1 and 2, and I explained, we already talked about the first couple of arguments, or explaining why my evidence is better. And then, in my arguments, under number 2, I have our evidence is better, it's predictive, okay? So my evidence is kind of claiming that it better predicts, or I'm making the claim that it better predicts what is going to happen. I said our evidence proves both the link and the impact non-unique. And then the next thing I say is that our HP evidence post-dates and is specific, the Huffington Post evidence from the 2AC. Our HP evidence post-dates and is specific to Senate opinion. Now you'll notice if you look back at the 2NC column, they make an argument about the House. When I'm making my argument about our Huffington Post evidence post-dating and being specific to Senate opinion, and I say House irrelevant because they follow the Senate, that is an example of embedding a clash. That argument answers that their House, whether or not their House card is relevant. Does everybody understand that? Okay, so what I do is I didn't have to say off their AP 622 card, okay, I didn't have to say off their number 1, off my 2. Instead I just said, our Huffington Post evidence post-dates and it takes into account the Senate, which proves the House is irrelevant because the Senate follows the House. Okay, that embeds the clash. I have explained why my argument is comparatively better to theirs. Okay, emphasis on comparatively. You have to do the comparative part in order for it to be embedded clash. Okay, it's the part where you answer their argument in your grouping of arguments. Everybody follow that? That makes sense to everyone? Does anyone have questions about that? Yes?
I've seen sometimes embedded clash like completely wreck people's flows because some people like they get not obvious by what they're answering. So is there like a way to like make sure if you do embedded clash you don't wreck your judge's flow?
Yeah, you follow exactly the formula that I've laid out here. If you again take a look at the 1AR column.
So make sure you group and explain.
Excuse me?
So make sure you say
Yes,
like,
let me finish my sentence.
Okay.
First, you said, look at what I have written here. Okay, stop focusing on that. Look at what's on your flow. It says at the top, off 2AC number 1 and 2 non-unique group. I wrote that phrase out as a signpost for just about every argument I ever extended from a 2AC in my 1AR. Similarly, we have a case flow. where I did the same thing. The first argument on the case flow is off 1NC number 1, status quo solves group. Okay? When you do that, when you say those things, you are telling the judge where you are identifying the argument, okay, so you've given them a geographic location, you have identified the argument, and then you say the word group. That tells them that you believe you are covering all of the things the 2NC said against the number 1, or against the 1 and 2. Okay? The word group there is crucial to what I was describing before, is how you convince people that you have structurally covered. Okay? The word group creates the illusion of coverage. Whether you actually answer every single word the 2NC or the 1NR said on this argument, you have asserted that you have grouped those arguments together, and that what you are about to say answers those arguments. Obviously, it would help if what you proceed to do does actually answer all of those arguments. However, you will probably not always have an answer to everything they say, or some of your answers may be thin relative to theirs. However, by structuring it this way, repeatedly and formulaically, when I say I wrote this for every single 2AC argument I ever extended, or every 1NC argument I ever answered, I am not lying. I did that for every damn one of them. Okay? That is what helps keep the flow more organized and neat. It conveys that you give a damn about their flows. Okay, when you get up and announce you are covering the link debate, that tells me that you don't care about my flow. That is what that signals to me. That signals to me that you are about to read a bunch of cards and are probably not going to apply a single one of them to the link turns that were actually read by the author. Or that you are about to only answer or only extend the arguments you want to extend and don't care what the neg said. Okay? So the trick to this, and you may think this is silly and I'm being like weird about this, but the trick to keeping the flow organized, to convincing people you have covered, and to conveying that you give a damn about the judge's flow, is to repeatedly make reference to the line by line in the way I just described. Nobody is going to tell you that you may still get occasionally accused of dropping a thing here or there. Okay, but it becomes a lot harder when you have cared about their flow, when you have said you were grouping the arguments, and that in most circumstances you actually make a concerted effort to answer their arguments. Okay? It will be a lot harder for people to be as critical of the 1AR as they might be right now. Is there another question up there?
What do you do, like, if you got mom and pop judges?
Oh, they love that. They love that stuff, because they're more likely to have numbers. Like, when they walk in, the mom and pops, they think you're supposed to be numbering, for the most part. They think debates are supposed to be slow and pleasant and organized, and so doing this, going through carefully. I mean, I'm not saying that you won't maybe need to add a little bit more clarity to your references to 2NC arguments. Like, you might have to say, you know, their card that said this, that's what I'm answering right now. You may need to do that occasionally. The problem is, though, structurally, you can't do that for every argument, because you'd never be able to keep up, because you have less than half the time they had to make them. Yeah?
What's the best way to, like, signify a group on flow?
Using the word group. Like I kid you not, folks, like, I wrote out for you exactly what I said. Okay? If you're like later, you're like, I don't know what Adrian said. It is on the flows that I've given you. Exactly what I would say if I were extending these arguments. If you look toward the bottom of the case flow, there's another 2AC argument. It says off 2AC number 3, low risk of impact group. And that's where I did all the impact debating. Okay, obviously if they've thrown overviews in or things like that, you may occasionally need to group the over and say they have an overview, group, and then make all of your answers. That's where you do your impact calc if that's where they've done it. Okay, but when you group things, you need to actually be answering the part of debate that you are grouping. Okay, well, that gets to number 4, signpost consistently. If the 1AR tells the judge to go off the 1NC number 5, little c, and then off the 2AC number 6, the 2Ns number 4, nobody's going to know where the hell you are. Okay, you have just given them a whole bunch of number soup and a little bit of alphabet soup thrown in that is very difficult to follow. By contrast, if you do what I just described consistently and signpost where you are and what you are grouping consistently, it makes it a lot easier. Let me back up one step. In the 2AC, it helps if two ACs structure their arguments in a way that makes it easier to flow. Okay, a 2AC that goes to a disad and says, 1, not unique, blah, 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 blah. 2, no link, there's no link because. 3, no impact. That's relatively easy to follow. When somebody makes an argument, what is the first thing you get flowed? The tagline. Do you get every word they say when they make an argument, or do you usually do a better job of getting the first things they say? Usually the first things. Does it help then if the 2A kind of uses a consistent formula where they say no link or no impact or no internal link or no solvency or something like that at the beginning? Or is the alternative better that when they get to the disad, the first thing they say is 1, their first card isn't really a link, card says might not will. Second, their uniqueness evidence is terrible, blah, blah, blah. Like, isn't that probably a little bit harder to flow? If they get there and they say their first card, blah, blah, blah. And again, we just said, when you're flowing, you usually get the first part of what they say, but maybe not all. If the first thing they say is their first card, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this happened to me in a practice round the other day. The only thing I got down of an argument was their first card. Is that an argument? Is that going to win the debate? Or would it be better if it was no link, their first card, blah, blah, blah? Okay, no link at least tells me what the impact of that argument is. But second, this also makes it easier for the 1AR. Okay? You'll notice the way I have these written down are off 2AC number 1 and 2, non-unique group. Okay? If it was off 2AC number 1, their first card, and 2AC number 2, their internal link is bad, that's a lot more to say. And a lot harder to follow. And you don't know that they all got the same words written down that you did. Odds are, if you use a formula in the 2AC of saying no link, no impact, non-unique, starting your tag with what the impact of the argument is, people are more likely to have that stuff consistently flowed, meaning that when the 1AR references it, we are all more likely to still be on the same page. Okay, so signposting consistently gets a little bit easier if your 2A helps you out. Number 5, reference arguments, not just numbers. We've mentioned this already, not everyone has the same set of numbers. This does have the potential for serious disaster. You may think that you're tricking the judge if you just reference things, or tricking the other team rather, if you just reference things by numbers. But in reality, you are probably also tricking the judge and fooling yourself at the same time. Because if you just reference, oh, extend the number 7, blah, 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 extend number 8, okay, unless you are referencing the particulars of the argument, this does run into the problem of if we don't have the same numbers, I may think you just extended something very different from what you think you just extended. Okay, the other thing is number 8 does not outweigh the DA. An argument can take out the DA or outweigh the DA, but number 8 ain't going to do it by itself. So you should write out the signposts and the reference on your flow as described in the next few pages. Okay, everybody take a look at the, we've talked a good bit about the off-case flow. Let's take a look at the case flow for a second. Is everybody with me there? Okay, so on the case flow, it is basically the reverse. The structure is fundamentally the same, but in this circumstance, you're going to follow the 1NC's structuring. So if you look at that 1AR column, you'll notice it says off 1NC number 1, status quo solves group. And then the beginning of the argument is the 1AC harm evidence and inherency evidence proves their ev is prescriptive of what could happen if there was serious reform. Ours is descriptive of what has happened. Okay, this is a case where descriptive evidence actually helps you. Okay, because you're saying our inherency evidence describes reality. Theirs is talking about a utopia that hasn't happened yet. Okay, but then I go on to say that the Freedom Act was lip service. Okay, so I'm actually once again referring to their number 1, because their number 1 was about the Freedom Act. Okay, so that's another example of embedding clash. Okay, another thing you can do is you could talk about your evidence, like the second argument that's here is that Hirsch concludes AF, the Hirsch, Sharp, and Snyder evidence cite experts. So we're talking about why the evidence is comparatively better. And that current reform is not enough, the plan's genuine reform is key. Okay, so that argument has a couple of arguments to it. Okay, it's drawing attention to our evidence as experts. It's drawing attention to multiple cards you want the judge to look at, but I'm not just listing authors, I'm telling you why those authors are important, because they are experts. Okay, and I'm saying the status quo reform isn't enough. and that genuine reform is necessary. So I'm drawing a distinction between their card that talks about reform and my assertion that my app is the genuine type of reform. Okay? All of that is in a very short sentence. Okay? That conveyed a bunch of arguments in a very short amount of time, and very little time to write that down. And then the next argument indicts a bunch of their evidence. Indicts are awesome, and y'all should take a hell of a lot more advantage of them than you do currently. Part of the problem is you don't read quals in the first place. If you read quals, it would be a lot easier for you to A, think about them, because it's hard to think about them when you don't even know who your own authors are, or haven't thought about who your own authors are. B, being able to point to the qualifications that you read in debate as it's like a built-in argument. Unless you're reading bad cards from unqualified people, you should have built-in arguments, right? All of your cards, typically produced here, we have told you to put quals on them. Okay, that is a built-in argument you can make in almost every round. Okay, and so being able to argue why your authors are qualified is a shortcut for answering a bunch of their cards. Okay, if you have chosen to read a very qualified author in your 1AC in the first place, that gives you a built-in answer to several things that they say. Number 7, no large-scale overviews. A quick one-liner that explains your turns or a damning uniqueness argument is fine, but you should not waste too much time. Okay, no more than 2 sentences, and it should be scripted. Part of why we often advise against you doing overviews in the first place is that it's like you think that's your opportunity to ramble. That's like your me time. The 1AR doesn't have any me time. The 1AR has to get through a lot of stuff. Okay, so if you are going to have a one-liner, script it out. You tripping over a one-liner and wasting 15 seconds is not a good use of your time. Number 8, no blipping. Judges cannot flow when you blippily extend arguments. To avoid that, you should write out as much of the argument as you can quickly. Again, this can be done if you have an efficient set of abbreviations. Number 9, use 1AR blocks. PC is key, and this is not in the political capital sense. PC means precise and concise. Precise and concise. You should precisely script out exactly what argument you want to make in the most concise but flowable fashion. Okay? Precise and concise. Blocks you should write. A, write blocks for arguments you have to make in every 1AR, which explains the reasons in your 2AC or your 1AC evidence sufficiently. Okay, again, this is very simple. You should be able to write blocks based on your cards. You have them, right? Look at them. Figure out how you would want to extend that card precisely and concisely in the 1AR. B, theory blocks. Newsflash, folks, the conditionality debate has not really changed since I debated. Technically, if I gave them to you, you could still read my 1AR blocks. Okay, the arguments don't change that much. Yes, 2Ns will make more of certain arguments than others, but you can script out theory blocks for handling those issues in the 1AR. It does not take very much. You just have to sit down and make yourself do it. Letter C, link turns. If you have additional cards you want to read on a link turn, that can be helpful. D, impact assessments. Okay, if you read, for certain impacts that you want to rely on to weigh against certain disads or to weigh against K, alts, the impacts to the K, alt solving, things like that, you can script out what that impact assessment is and say it in the efficient fashion. Again, you folks love when you think, oh, I know my impact, I can talk about it, except you ramble, okay? What does every neg block say? Every neg block talks about probability, time frame, magnitude, and turns the case, right? Those are like the 4 things they do about impacts to answer your impacts. They do more stuff, but they all do that usually, right? Why not write out a version of a block that answers those from your app's perspective? Okay, not that hard. Letter E, tricks. If there are things that are tricky or complex that you need to explain, for instance, that a crackdown on drones is coming in the status quo, making their link arguments inevitable, and only the AF can resolve the impetus for that crackdown, that's something you could script out just so that you nail the explanation of it. Tricks are inherently tricky. Hence why you want to make sure you explain them exactly the way the judge needs to in order for the judge to understand it, because you don't want the judge to be tricked as well. Big letter D, we're now going to talk about covering particular types of arguments. Covering topicality. You should extend a mix of offensive and defensive arguments in order to give your partner room to maneuver in the 2AR. You should not just go for we needs. You should also go for reasons why their interpretation is bad, reasons why your interpretation is good. You should have a mixture of those arguments. Also, make new answers if the interpretation has changed. Okay, everybody, all AFs hate the shifting T arg. Okay, but half the AFs forget to handle the two that the neg block shifted the T arg. Because you forgot to have a highlighter there to mark when the interpretation changed, or if you forgot to make note that this is not quite the way the violation was read in the 1NC. Make new answers if it has changed. Letter E, covering disads and Ks. 1, diversity. You want to go for a diversity of arguments in order to give your partner flexibility. Okay, if you only go for a no-link argument, you are asking to probably lose. Okay, you have straitjacketed or constrained your partner in a way that may make it hard when the neg will get up and say, there's at least a risk of a link, they have no offense. Okay, you should be going for a combination of arguments. You don't have to necessarily go for offense. It generally helps. But you can't solely go for a singular defensive argument and win most of the time. Okay? A combination of defensive arguments, an internal link takeout, something about the probability of the impact, and a link argument. For some disads, that can be enough to persuade somebody that there's zero risk. But the danger is that if you only go for one argument, the neg will be able to argue there's at least some risk, and then, they'll extend their nuclear war extinction impact and that risk. That's kind of daunting. Number 2, 2NC evidence. Answer important 2NC evidence directly, especially new links or internal links, or if they've snuck in a value to life impact or a rollback claim. Number 3, extensions. Extend and build on your arguments, don't just repeat them. Okay? You will damage the credibility of your 1AR if all you do is extend 2AC taglines and don't do things to rebuild your arguments. Okay, another thing that damages your credibility is when you say something was conceded when it was not. Okay, you may not have thought their answers were very good, but calling it conceded when there's a wall of answers next to it does not look good for you. It tells me you can't flow. If you thought that was conceded, we have a problem. Okay, so make sure that you build on your arguments. Number 4, read evidence if necessary. You should read evidence to bolster weakened 2AC arguments or to refute new 2NC evidence or 1NR evidence. I am not of the you need to read a pile of cards in the 1AR camp. I think you should be striking a balance. If you are reading cards, that is usually at the exclusion of you making additional arguments. And so be selective about when and where you read cards. I'm not saying you shouldn't read any, but it's a balance. You don't need to read a pile of cards necessarily. Number 5, be selective. Don't waste your time on arguments you can't win or on arguments that wouldn't help you even if you did win. Okay, the sort of nitpicky, their card says might, not will. It's not like a devastating Slayer argument. And even if you're right that the card says might and not will, is that going to win you the debate? Probably not. Okay, you could straight turn arguments to force the neg's hand. Okay, if they're terrible and don't the politics DA and you know they don't want to extend it, this might be the time for you to just go for uniqueness and link turns to force them to have to extend it. Letter F, covering counterplans and alts. 1, diversity, again, same as above. 2, solvency deficits. You want to make sure that you make arguments about why the counterplan doesn't solve for your AF, but don't forget to quantify or impact those arguments. Okay, just declaring that they don't solve for credibility as much without explaining why the deficit in credibility matters to the solvency for the AF or matters to how much of the advantage they get. Okay, it may be that, they may not solve as much, but they still, the phrase the neg always uses is they are sufficient to solve. You want to overcome that sufficiency by explaining why if they don't solve as much, that means they don't get X amount of your AF, and X amount of your AF is important. Number 3, permutation. You should go for it. You should make sure you explain there is a net benefit to the permutation. Why is the permutation the best option in the debate? Why does the permutation help you avoid the link? You can also explain if there is a double bind, particularly in critique debates, that if the permutation includes the alt, Okay, if the alt is so damn powerful, it ought to be able to overcome the tiny link to doing the af with it. Right? Usually people's alts are like, oh, we reject capitalism. That solves all the bad things about capitalism. But the second the af tries to combine it with the perm, they're like, oh, no, no. Now it doesn't work. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Right? You should be able to argue that the capitalism alt, if it's so damn powerful it can change the world when the neg does it, how come it can't overcome, you know, your tiny little af? Number 4, I'll take questions in a couple of minutes. Number 4, offense. Okay, in order to prove the counterplan is not net beneficial, it's a good idea to have some sort of external offense, reasons why the counterplan is bad, reason why it links to the disav they're going for. And then, if possible, you want to be able to go for theory. It sucks to be a 2NR having to cover theory. Every one of you who are 2Ns in here know it. You hate it when the 1AR goes for theory. Okay? Half the time the 1AR does a really shoddy job, what y'all call shadow extending. But if the 1AR goes for it for real, ugh, that sucks for a 2NR. Okay, if you can actually, and this is again, write blocks, because then you can go for it for real, and you don't have to just shadow extend. So, strong recommendation that if you can keep theory credibly viable, you should. Number 6, net benefit. Make sure you answer any other internal net benefit from the 1NC or new in the block. Make sure you make arguments about how the plan solves it or avoids the net benefit, or why the counterplan or the alt links to it. But make sure that this is kind of your checklist for the 1AR. Okay? You've all been given templates for what you need to do in the 2NC and the 2AC and the 2NC. This is sort of your template for the 1AR. Letter G, covering the case. 1, prioritize. Cover round losing arguments first. The ones that if you lose, you will lose the debate. Then cover the important arguments, and then worry about the dinky takeout that mitigates your impact by 4 lives. Okay? You know, you can spot them that one if you have to. But you gotta win the ones that you have to win the debate. If you cannot win, if you do not win an impact that outweighs their dised, and they're doing in pretty good shape on the dised, you're in trouble. So devoting time to making sure you win your solvency in order to get the full weight of your impact, usually pretty important. Number 2, make sure you extend your case impacts. Okay, 1ARs kind of just forget a lot. So you got a lot going on. A lot of stuff to do. And that seems to be one of the first things to get cut. 2As, they love to talk about their impacts. 1ARs, it's like a, state secret. You should try to get in the habit, what I did was I tried to get in the habit as I was leaving a page of the case, I always tried to make sure I referenced my impact. I would also, oftentimes I would use a whole nother, I was rainbow bright, I had all the highlighters with me. I would use a different color highlighter to mark on my 1AC the impact cards so that if I was like rushing to move from one page to another, I could draw my attention to the blue highlighting to remember to extend my impact. Number 3, evidence. If necessary, read evidence that, particularly when arguments get blown up by the neg, like they read one analytic on this in the 1NC, but all of a sudden the 2NC's got a pile of cards on it. It's the time you might need to double down with a little more evidence. Number 4, know your 1AC. Okay, refer to your 1AC evidence frequently, referencing phrases from the evidence. Okay, that was kind of my crutch on case arguments that I had forgotten to prep thoroughly, or on a case argument where I wasn't sure how to answer. I would fall back on references to the real good cards from the 1AC, and more often than not, something I said might be relevant. Okay. Number H, or letter H, see? You think in numbers. I should have just numbered all of this instead of lettering. H, covering arguments the 2AC dropped. Alright, this is like the real finale here. This is the important stuff. First, use 1AC evidence. Explain how it was already answered in 1AC evidence. Preferably 1AC evidence, the 2AC did extend. That helps your cause. 2, use 2AC evidence. Explain how other 2AC arguments already answered it. Okay, if a team reads a disad, a terrorism disad, and an executive power disad, and a politics disad that all functionally have the same link story that you weaken the president, okay, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that a judge would think that your answer to that link on one flow probably also applies to the other 2 flows, okay? If you can draw similarities to where 2AC evidence, of course I didn't have to repeat that. 2AC evidence already answered that. 3rd, impact assessment. Okay, when arguments have been dropped, you can often get away with like, oh, even if they, you can make statements like, even if they win this argument, there's no impact. You're doing impact assessment. You are slipping in new answers by talking about even if you win, there's no impact, right? Debates are supposed to progress and evolve over the course of time. Okay, so an impact comparison is an easy way in the normal evolution of a debate to slip in a new argument. Number 4, use neg block to your advantage. Use negative block evidence to justify new arguments. Okay, there's nothing I loved more than when we did a meh job answering their link in the 2AC, and then the 2NC, for no apparent reason except they hated themselves, read more link evidence. Why? Because that opened the door for me to make new arguments. You could have just called it a day on the link, but you had to insist on reading more link evidence. That gives me, as the 1AR, a whole new set of answers. You are always allowed to answer new cards. So you can now start making all the arguments you wish your partner had made in the 2AC. Okay? Take advantage of that opportunity. Number 5, make new arguments. Straight up do it. There's a few ways to execute this. A, make them and don't acknowledge that they're new. Just make them. Move on, make them, move on. Okay. B, make them. Explain that while they seem new, they aren't for X, Y, or Z reasons. This, of course, will actually make clear that they are in fact new. But you may have good justifications for why they're legitimated based on, this is a new twist on the argument or something like that. Or letter C, just straight up make them and defend that new arguments are your right as a 1A. Those are legitimate. All right, last couple of things. Letter I, prioritization. 1, prioritize arguments. You want to cover new arguments. You want to cover lose-lose arguments. Arguments if you lose the debate, mean they lose you the debate. Arguments that if you win you the debate. And then other cleanup junk that, somebody might think is relevant, but it's probably a low priority. If you have a really small advantage that's not that big a deal and they only have defense on, you could put that lower in the order, if you don't need to extend it. 2, nevers. Never put T last. Never drop your offense. Okay, you've got to keep your offense up in the order. Now your offense is usually your AF, your case, but sometimes you may be in trouble on your case, and you may decide that your offense is the turns on the politics DA, or the impact turns on the K flow. Okay, in which case you should prioritize that. Be familiar with and know how to assess your offense to figure out where it should go, what the most important offense to cover is. 3rd, time allocation. You should allocate time generally in proportion to the neg block. Okay, spending 3 minutes on an argument they spent 30 seconds on is a recipe for not covering. Okay, you should try to ask yourself, how can I efficiently cover each thing in proportion? I would often tell my partner, make sure I get here with 30 seconds. Okay, back in the day, we used to call time for our partners. Okay, I know you all carry timers, so did I. Okay, I carried a timer. How often do you remember to look at it? Okay, how often do you process in your head, oh, I have 90 seconds left, and I have 4 things to go to? You don't. Okay, until you're on the super awesome list and you win every tournament, maybe then you will. But in the meantime, would it kill you to have your partner call out 4 or 3 or 90 or something like that to let you know? Okay, because then when someone says it to you, it might motivate you to figure out, oh crap, I got 3 flows left. 1 more second, and I promise I will take all of your questions. Number 4, overcover arguments. Okay, overcover the arguments that are dangerous and are going to hurt you if they spend a lot of time on them. Number 5, and this is an advanced, sophisticated tip. This is not one to take lightly. This is again, kind of when you're awesome, do this. 5, undercover strategically. Okay, I wanted people to go for the politics CA against me. Why? Because we were sweet on it. I did not want people to go for the K against me. Why? Because I sucked at it. Okay, so I would undercover the politics DA or other arguments that I thought I was better on to bait them into going for it. Okay, as opposed to, by contrast, I would overcover some of the other arguments to make it harder for them to go for them. This is something, again, not to be taken lightly. Again, do not walk in and say, Adrian says we should barely cover the politics DA. That's not what I'm saying. This is think about it, ask yourself, are you better on these arguments? Are their explanations weak? Do you have a tight card on this that they're just not getting, takes out the uniqueness to the whole DA? Okay, you can sometimes do that. Number 6, concessions. You can concede arguments where you can to save time. Okay, kick the advantage that isn't gonna outweigh anything. Kick the advantage that the counter plan already solves for anyway, okay? Number 7, underviews. Do not have them. There is no time in the 1AR for the part where you stop and say, now I'm gonna give you the highlights of the earlier part of my speech. If you've got time for that, you should be reading cards or something. Or you should be extending more arguments. You should never have enough time for that. You should end strong, but not summarizing. Keep going until the timer goes off. That is what I have. You have some questions over there in the back, sir?
I forgot.
Oh, my bad. Sorry about that. If they come back to you, you can come talk to me. Yeah.
When it comes to underviews, there's like some like lay judges will say like I want an underview. So would you say like
Okay,
like,
if a
underviews,
judge
like,
tells you
experienced
to
judges?
dance on a chair or do an underview or that you should never say the word Smith, then fine, do all those things.
Can you explain the part where you were on permutation, which was on F, and you said that if all of it's so powerful, it should be able to overcome the F or something like that?
Yeah, so the alternative, usually most K alternatives are pretty utopian, right? They say they're gonna get rid of capitalism. Capitalism exists in lots of forms, okay? Capitalism is all over this room. Capitalism is in every part of GDI swag you have on right now. Capitalism is everywhere. You make some arguments like that in the 2AC, that capitalism is inevitable, capitalism will fight back, capitalism is everywhere. And then the neg's like, oh, no, our alt overcomes that. Okay, but then when they get to the perm, they say, oh, but there's a link to the plan, because the plan is included in the perm. That means the alt will fail when you include it with the plan. Hey, hold up, a minute ago, the alt could solve everything about capitalism ever. But now all of a sudden the alt can't solve if you throw the plan into it? That doesn't make very much sense, and that is known as the classic permutation double bind. Either the permutation solves because the alt is powerful enough to overcome the little bit of link to the app, or it means the alt couldn't solve anything in the first place. It couldn't have solved all those things about capitalism. It's so weak that it falls down in the face of the plan. Does that make sense? Kate?
I guess. So say in the 2NC they answer like, you read a card in 2AC that has a lot of different warrants in it, and then in the block they only answer like 2 or 3 of them. Do you think it's a fair, or like a good strategic decision to concede those warrants and go for the ones that the evidence they didn't answer?
Sure, yeah, you can definitely, that is a shortcut. If you have a card that makes a bunch of arguments, a shortcut way when they only answer one of them is to focus on the others and explain why those are more important than the one they did answer. Before you forget.
Alright, would it be wise for your partner to like call out to you, like, you know, like move on to like the next thing?
Yes and no. That's something you should practice with your partner. Because we've all seen the 1AR that gets rattled by that and then ends up not covering anything. Especially, that should never happen. Af, neg, any speech. The last 15 seconds are like sacrosanct. Okay? Unless they are about to drop a voting issue or about to drop a whole DA, you don't interrupt your partner in the last 15 seconds. Okay, and even then, it's something you should practice doing, work out signals, work out hand signals, something, so that your partner doesn't freak out when you interrupt them in the last 15 seconds. Because far too frequently what happens is, hey, go to this page, what? Go to this page, what? Beep, beep, beep. BBB, BBB, right? You've all seen that happen. You've all probably had that happen. Make sure that you choreograph with your partner such interruptions so that if they do happen, they happen in the smoothest fashion possible. One last thing, super important before I forget. That phrase group that we talked about, because this is really what I want you to take away. Not any of the other things that I told you, don't go back to that later. The group thing, okay? Referring the signpost with the phrase group. Something else I forgot to draw attention to. When you say group, again, you are asserting that I am about to cover all of the arguments that Egg made here, okay? That phrase group, again, creates the illusion of coverage. Whether or not you precisely cover or not, you have said, I am covering. You have declared that to be the case. It gives your partner the opportunity between your 1AR and the 2AR to figure out how something you did say actually did answer what they said. Okay? It gives your partner the flexibility. By you declaring group, it gives your partner the room to maneuver between now and the 2AR to figure out how something you did say applied, even if the negative doesn't fit with it. Yes?
Flipping?
Flipping is when you only very briefly say like 2 words of an argument, or when you just extend a number, or you just extend a tag. It's basically the times that you can't flow because they're going too fast and aren't completing thoughts. That's flipping.